Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
It is Friday. Welcome to another edition of the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. I'm Gus Kattengell. As always, I appreciate you joining us. Jim Eichenhofer, NewOrleansPelicans.com, also in here as well. Always love a Friday, especially on a game day, and especially when it's against the top team in the Western Conference. Another big showdown coming up. I kind of like this week. It's a little different. The Pelicans have had a couple of days off in between games. You had 2 days off, or 3 days in between that game back in the day last Friday,
right,
when it took on Phoenix. And then they had a day off, 2 days of practice, solid franchise record-setting performance against the Jazz on Tuesday. Wednesday, Thursday, no game, and you game on Friday here. It's kind of nice to have that, especially for them to practice, because they said practice mattered, and you saw it on Tuesday. That was an incredible performance.
It really was. I mean, to break the franchise record for scoring and assists in the same game, to have Zion Williamson set his career high in assists. I mean, there were so many different things that were incredible. To have 23 made three-pointers not long after you set the franchise record in that category as well,
right,
with 25 in the game against Charlotte. So, yeah, across the board, it was a great performance. I think it does feel kind of like it's almost been like a mini All-Star break, the fact that they've only played one game in the last 6 or 7 days. But I think it's well-deserved or well-earned, and also something that they should be taking advantage of from a rest standpoint, because we know the stretch coming up here is going to be tough. I mean, back-to-back, one of the most difficult back-to-backs if you look at the opponents that they have Friday and Saturday, but there's also a few of them coming up in February as well. So had a little time to get some rest and relaxation, but, man, you're headed right back into a schedule that's very difficult. Also, after this game tonight, home game against Oklahoma City, they have 8 of their next 9 games are on the road. So you come back for one home game against Toronto, and then you go right back and play a second 4-game road trip over a very brief, 2 or 3 week span. That's a lot.
That's one of those things where we love Mardi Gras. Maybe the Pels exactly don't, because they get out of town because of that. But it is. Look, you bring up a very interesting point, but that's kind of something that this team's had to do, right? They've had to overcome long road trips already. And really, quite honestly, I don't know if it's just because the West is the way it is, Jim, or we kind of want them to be at a certain spot, so every game seems like it's a big game for us. But I sort of feel like it's been a tough season for the Pels in terms of who they're playing and their opponents in the NBA, and you have to play every night, because if not, you're going to get smoked with the three-point shot and whatever. So in other words, I almost feel like this is almost status quo, right? I mean, like next month, well, they played that in January. Well, they played that in December. So in other words, it doesn't feel like it's something out of the ordinary, if that makes any sense.
No, for sure. I mean, we went into the season when the schedule came out and you line up the Western Conference and you see how tough it's going to be, that you knew that there were going to be a lot of stretches that were going to be very difficult. There's hardly any breathers in the conference. I mean, there's only maybe 3 teams that don't have a chance to compete for even the play-in tournament. So you're talking 12 other teams that you go into all those games saying this is going to be a challenge tonight. So especially the way that, for example, Houston has drastically improved from the team that they were last year. So you're right. I mean, this is just the way it is. This is what you have to expect. It is a little extreme, though, that you're playing against 3 teams in a row in this immediate stretch of teams that are all top 2 in their conference, between OKC, Milwaukee back-to-back, and then Boston. But something that they're going to have to do the best they can to compete. And, I mean, the fact that they've played so well on the road over the last month plus, to me, is very encouraging and makes you more optimistic that they can handle kind of a gauntlet of opponents.
It's kind of incredible. As you mentioned, February, you do have 3 back-to-backs at the Lakers, at the Blazers, and then later on the month, on the 22nd and 23rd, you host the Rockets, host the Heat. Hadn't seen them yet this season. And then you're at the Knicks, who are playing incredible, at the Pacers. That all of a sudden looks like a ridiculous back-to-back, because both of those teams are playing well. Yep. So, look, it's just kind of how it is. You almost do have to take it by the game, and by that game, it's tonight against Oklahoma City. Look, we left the broadcast Tuesday. They were in first place. They're a half game back. It's not like it's a big thing. They're one of the top teams in the West for a reason. SGA, it was crazy. We're going to talk about it coming up with our guest next segment, Madison Hock, who does Thunder games as well and host Thunder Live. About the season SGA is having, I watched after our game, the second half of that doubleheader, OKC at San Antonio. Chet Holmgren and Wemby were going at it. I'm like, that this team is really good, and they want to blowing them out later on. So, Jim, when you look at Oklahoma City, are you surprised where they are?
I am a little bit, but when you look at the talent and you look at the way that Chet Holmgren has emerged this year, it's not as much of a shock when you consider how good he's been as a rookie. I think people had high expectations for him, but for me, he's exceeded those just with how good he's been. But by the way, the fact that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was named an all-star starter, I think it's kind of cool that OKC has an all-star starter, Indiana has a starter, and Milwaukee has two. So you're talking some of the smallest markets of the NBA all getting starters like that, which I think is a good sign for the league as far as the distribution of talent and the fact that you don't have to play in a huge market to get the recognition that those guys have gotten. But I think one of the things, if you look at kind of specifics on the Thunder, when you ask, what's the surprising part about that or how surprised are you? To me, their three-point shooting has been something that I don't think going into the season people thought the Thunder are going to be, a knockdown three-point team, a team that you have to really fear. But of their top 7 guys who've taken the most threes per game this season, 4 of them are shooting over 40%. So between Isaiah Joe, Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, the Jalen Williams that they refer to as J-Dub starter, and Cason Wallace, all 4 of those guys are over 40%. Of their high-volume guys, really 2 of the ones that are not shooting at an elite level are SGA and Josh Giddey, who are their 2 starting guards. But besides that, I mean, across the board, they have so many guys. The fact that they're near the top of the league, in addition to all the other talent that they have and the versatility that they have at so many positions, that to me has been the thing that's kind of lifted them to a different echelon of the league. The fact that you have to worry about SGA's drives and Jalen Williams' drives and Holmgren with all the stuff that he can do, but they also have an array of shooters that can burn you if you leave them open. So that's been huge for them this season.
It's crazy. You just said not at elite level. The guy's averaging SGA 31 points, but also how surprised are you that he's leading the NBA in steals, and the second person or player that has steals, it's 31. He's 31 behind SGA in terms of steals.
Yeah, that's impressive, the fact that he's been so good in that area. I mean, that's one thing that the Pelicans definitely have to be concerned with tonight is him getting in the passing lanes, him getting in, being disruptive at the defensive end. I think one of the things that, this is so long ago in the scope of the season that I almost wonder how relevant it is, but Pelicans beat OKC 110-106 on November 1st. And one of the things that really keyed the Pelicans being able to come back and win that game was SGA and Jalen Williams combined to shoot 13 for 33 from the field, and they were also 0 for 8 on three-pointers. So New Orleans did a really good defensive job in that game, especially against those of the Thunder's 2 biggest offensive weapons. So I'm curious to see if the Pelicans can do anything close to that. I think if they can if those 2 guys put up similar numbers tonight, I think the Pelicans will definitely take that.
And it's not like there's no storylines tomorrow when the team goes to Milwaukee. All they did this week was get rid of their head coach and then move on with Doc Rivers. Now, he hasn't coached just yet that we know of. He may or may not coach tonight. I can't imagine he doesn't coach tomorrow, but that's going to be interesting because that's a team that went all in. I mean, they've doubled down on all in. They made that big trade for Damian Lillard, and now at 30 wins, now 31 wins, they move on from their head coach, which is incredible. So they have doubled down. And I was surprised by the length of that contract. Like, Doc Rivers is signed through like 26, 27 season. So, and a big deal, something like $40 million. So he ain't going anywhere.
That's probably what they had to give him to convince him to do
to leave,
you know what I mean?
Broadcasting, but that's my point, though. So I'm interested to see how this team is going to sort of be. And I guess in talking to Corey Glore, voice of the Tulane Green Wave, who's a Bucks fan, it's defense. Apparently, they're not. Well, imagine that you don't have Drew Holiday, but that's kind of the thing. And when you look at Doc Rivers, like, what's a Doc Rivers imprint on a basketball team? And I know it's early. I can't expect that that's going to be a big change tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that he's not going to have time to put in a bunch of different
You got to
changes.
figure out your team and all that.
And I think it's interesting because I can't imagine. It's so hard for me to wrap my mind around being 30-13 and firing your head coach, but it just shows you what the level of play that they expect from that team. The fact that obviously they won a championship a couple of years ago, and so the expectations are really high. They're ranking in the 20s right now in defensive efficiency. That is definitely something that I'm sure was a big factor in them making the decision to do what they did. But I mean, as evidenced by their record, I mean, they could have me as their head coach, and I'd think they'd still be doing really well, and they'd still be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. So, but it's in terms of Doc Rivers' impact Saturday, I guess from a Pelican standpoint, you hope that they're kind of indecisive, that they, he can't, like we said, he can't make a bunch of changes, but maybe he tries to put in a few different things, and they're kind of
messes
tentative.
It all up. I like that.
Yeah.
It's a good plan, Jim.
That's what
that's a good
yeah,
plan.
that's my plan, and I'm going to stick with it. No. So yeah, I think, but yeah, I'm not sure what impact he's going to have, and we don't even know officially when he's going to start as head coach, but they're definitely in a period of a little bit of turmoil, and kind of we'll see how much that affects the game Saturday.
I love that wishful thinking. You used turmoil. I was thinking you were going to go transition. But
Transition.
Turmoil sounds a lot better. Look, I'll take any advantage whatsoever. It'll be a big game tonight, of course, here at the Smoothie King Center. Then, boom, up to Milwaukee. And as Jim said, you'll briefly see the team here one more time. And then the rest of the time, they'll be on the road, and we'll talk about that. But it is time to bring in our guest for today's podcast, Miss Madison Hock. And, of course, we're going to have a lot to talk about that. And then, Jim, when we come back, we're also going to get, what are we doing, the Friday numbers?
The trending number.
The trending numbers. Love that. That's coming up. But first, our guest. All right, Jim, it's time to welcome in our guest for today. And it is a very interesting guest in that I think I might have to choose her in our game of 21. Madison, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but we are going to play a game of 21. We've asked Antonio Daniels. I asked David Wesley. He said he's just going to go sit in a corner. I don't know how AD is going to play. I think he's going to take him as well. But you actually did play basketball as well, as we welcome in Madison Hock, part of Bally Sports, and, of course, Bally Sports New Orleans, covering Pelicans games. But like I like to say, athlete. How are you, Madison?
I love this. Yes, I've heard you guys are going to play a game of 21. Count me in. I am totally on board. Kind of surprises me that David Wesley wouldn't want to get in on this, because he's a fierce competitor. So I definitely would like to get in on this, and I don't know, we'll see. AD, he's got a pretty good shot. David has a pretty good shot, but I am feeling pretty confident that I could take you guys on.
How's your jumper, Madison? You still locked in?
I'm pretty locked in. I'll say I kind of have the Brandon Ingram mid-range game.
Oh,
that was my game. Not as good as Brandon Ingram, obviously, by any means, but the mid-range game was my go-to. So, yeah, from mid-range, from about 12, 15 feet, I am lights out still. I still play a little bit, not a lot.
That's not what I heard. What I heard is, if you've seen Brandon Ingram, you've seen me play. That's basically what I heard from Madison Hock. The other thing, too, is we had Jason Smith on earlier in the podcast, and he talked, about how the game sort of changed as well. When you look at today's game, obviously, I think last night we're checking out here in the city, LSU taking on number 1 South Carolina in women's basketball. The 3-point shot still being, I think, everywhere else in the NBA and stuff, but you still need that low post presence. Your game still translates to today, though, right? Got to be able to make some shots.
I do talk a big game, because I will say I went out and shot around a couple days ago, like at the local gym I go to, and it was rough. It was really rough. And I've been out of the game now for 7 years, which is crazy. And I came home and my husband was like, "How'd you play?" I was like, "Not great. Not going to lie. I thought it was like riding a bike where I would just jump right in, but not great." I guess I have an excuse. I am almost 7 months pregnant. So I do have that excuse going for
congratulations.
me.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you. No, I do love the mid-range game, though. It's been fun to watch. I was covering women's basketball and college basketball before I came to Bally, and I covered a lot of Tennessee basketball, Lady Vols basketball. And to me, it felt like the mid-range game wasn't as utilized as it was whenever I played. And now I feel like coaches are trying to establish that more and more and bring that back, because it is automatic. If you can hit that mid-range jumper, it's automatic. You're such a threat. So yeah, it's been fun to watch just kind of the game evolve from both the college side and the NBA side.
You know, speaking of getting buckets, the Pelicans are coming off a game where they scored 153 points. I mean, 153 to 124 was the final score against Utah. As a former player, I'm kind of curious. What do you think of kind of the balance between offense and defense in the NBA right now? Is it something that, do you like it this way? Is it kind of getting a little bit out of whack in terms of the offense has such a huge advantage? What's on the defense? What's your perspective on that right now in the NBA?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I am such a defensive minded person. I like to think like Willie Green, defense comes first and defense wins a lot of really big clutch games. I think that if we're talking, if we're looking at the Pelicans' next opponent, the Oklahoma City Thunder, that's an area that the Thunder are locked in on right now too, is the defensive end of the ball. So when you take a look at some of the top teams in the NBA, the balance is there more than we've seen in years past. That defense is more of a presence, more of an emphasis now than we have seen in the past few years. I think the Pelicans have that balance. I think that the Thunder have that balance. And so when you take a look at the Pelicans, though, and what they have been able to do, so much of their offense has come from their defense. And we could say the same thing about the Thunder. Both of these teams want to play fast. They want to get out and transition. They want their guards to rebound so they can push. And when you have that balance in the NBA, those are the top teams that we're going to see in April, in May, in June. I think it depends, though, on the organization, if their coaches are forcing that or really drilling that. But that's why I think it's fun when I talk to the coaches with the Pelicans, and the first thing they tell me immediately is it all starts with our defense. Like before we even go into the offense, we're talking defense. And I respect that because that's something that we have seen lacking in the NBA for years and years and years. It used to bother me so much when I was in high school or college and I would watch an NBA game and just wide open three, and full court transition three. Nobody picking anyone up. But I think the Miami Heat have done a great job really establishing different defensive looks and how you can still use the zone in the NBA and it can still be effective. Look what they're doing right now with their defense. So I think that we're getting to more of a balance, more of an emphasis, and people just realizing that defense does still matter. Even when you're playing and you're talking about the best players in the world, now they're talking about defense too. Listen to Zion Williamson, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum. I can name them all right after a game. What's the first thing almost every single time they mention? Our defense. And so I really respect that out of the Pelicans.
It's interesting. You just guys are talking about defense too. One of the things that we've been talking about on this podcast and even on my talk show here, Madison, is that do we have to maybe define or change the definition or expectation level of what a good defensive team sort of is, right? Because I just look at, is it this week? I think what Embiid hit 70, Karl Anthony Towns 62, Durant 47. We saw Booker with 52. I don't. Is it a regular season thing? Do we expect that to come down in a postseason, or do we have to look at it as, hey, the days of, the Pels put up 77 and a half. Those used to be final scores back in the day. Like when, my dad's all there, why are they shooting at threes? I'm like, Dad, that's how it is now. So I wonder what the expectation level is of, hey, can you keep a team to under 120, 110? Because I don't know what good defense sort of is in terms of teams are coming out saying we want to shoot 40 threes, Right. So that's kind of, it's hard to judge, like, what is a good defensive performance?
Right. Absolutely. And I'm glad you bring up that point about threes, because when you're talking about that was the first thing that came into my mind. Well, the emphasis in the league wide now is every single team wants to shoot more threes. We saw the Pelicans really establish that in their offense towards the late end of last season. You could tell that they were wanting to get up 35 to 40 threes per game. And I remember sitting at the Smoothie King Center talking to David Wesley about it, and our minds were just blown. Like that is the number that teams are wanting to shoot in the NBA now from behind the arc. They're wanting to get more threes. They're wanting to play faster. So of course, those offensive numbers, final scores, are going to be higher and higher. It's not so much the one-on-one slam dunks. Obviously, that is still a huge part of the game, but it seems like more and more for league-wide, the emphasis has been shooting from behind the arc. So, and you bring up this week what we've seen Devin Booker do. I was just looking at his last 6 games, averaging almost 40 points in his last 6 games.
Crazy.
He just did it against the Mavs, did it against the Pelicans, of course. But that's just a player that's difficult to guard. He's going to have nights like that. Zion Williamson could have a night like that once a week, and CJ McCollum we're seeing put up big numbers like that because of his shooting from behind the arc. But Zion and CJ obviously do it in different ways. So I think it's just you're going to see those numbers continue to increase, which is crazy. I don't think it's necessarily a lack of the defensive front. I don't think that we're going to see guys totally locked in defensively until we're talking standings more, until the playoffs matter more, because that's part of it, right? It used to be the old cliche saying of defense wins games, rebound wins championships. And I think Willie Green is somebody that still preaches that and knows that that is still to be true. But are you saying that to a guy every single night when there's 82 games and you do have guys who are elite scorers who can put up 40 every night if they want? I don't know. And obviously offense sells tickets. Fans want to see Devin Booker put up 45 and Joel Embiid put up 70 and break the record. That's what fans want to see. So of course the league is giving you some entertainment with that as well.
You mentioned earlier kind of the balance that the Pelicans and Thunder have. They're both in the top 10 in offense and defense. I know there aren't that many teams in the league that can say that. It's a pretty small group. I was wondering with Oklahoma City, for you covering them, how do you think people should view them being 31-13? I mean, is it that they've really surpassed expectations? Are they ahead of schedule? How do you think people should kind of put that in context, the fact that they're so young and that they're, near the top of the West standings?
Yeah, one of the youngest teams in the NBA. It's been really impressive to see what they have been able to do this season with the addition of Chet Holmgren. When you take a look back at the Thunder last season, at certain times throughout the season, they led the NBA in points in the paint, and they weren't even playing with a traditional big man. Now you add 7'1" Chet Holmgren, who can stretch the floor, who can shoot threes. I mean, he plays like a guard at times as well. And so, or a lot of times, I should say. And so they're kind of like the Pelicans right now, where they're firing on all cylinders. They're clicking and they're bought in. It's a really disciplined team, and they know what it takes to win. They know how to win when everyone is bought into what Mark Dagnall is trying to do in the system that he has established. They just have multiple threats. Obviously, SGA, an elite player, one of the best players in this league. And we were looking at this whenever I was hosting Thunder Live the other day. We were talking about their veterans. Their veterans are 24, 25 years old. They're so young, right? But what they've been able to do, it just makes me go back to the point of they're just bought in right now. They're just locked in. And am I a little surprised that they're the number one team in the West? Yeah, maybe, because they are playing exceptional. And this is the first time we've seen Chet Holmgren in the NBA. And I think a lot of his success is because he had last year to sit back and watch. Obviously, as a player, when you're injured, that's worst case scenario, but you learn so much when you're sitting on the bench and you're able to have just a gap year almost to take a deep breath and learn the system and get adjusted to the NBA. But they, from 3-point, from points in the paint, from transition points, lead the NBA and fast break points. And then we talk about their defense too. SGA leads the NBA in steals per game. So right now, just completely locked in, firing on all cylinders, but they have a balance. And that's what I've been talking about so much with the Pelicans too. The Pelicans have that balance. If you hone in on CJ McCollum, BI and Zion are going to step up, and vice versa. Or you might have the second line step up as well. And so they are so deep. And that is the exact same way the Thunder are too. I'm really fired up for this game because if we take a look back at all the times these organizations have played against each other in the last, 6 games, it's come down to the wire. And we saw that in October as well, when the Pelicans were down, 22 points and ended up coming back and winning. So it's going to be really fun because of the similarities between these two teams.
Yeah, there's been some wild games between these teams. We had a couple of years back, we had Devontae Graham make a 65-footer at the buzzer to win, which was preceded by Shea Gilgeous-Alexander making like a 40-footer to tie the game. That was crazy. But as a former player, I'm curious, what do you think has been the most impressive part about the impact that Chet Holmgren has made, or his game? What is the thing that when you watch him play, you say, man, this is impressive the way
he's going to bring that up too, what he was saying, because that game against San Antonio, I mean, that start of the fourth quarter, I was sending video clips to the graph. I'm like, are you seeing this? Him and Wemby have got a little rivalry there brewing there, but I'd never seen him attack the basket like that and be physical. He's hitting the three, but him running the court, that first 4-minute stretch, I don't know if you saw it, against Wemby in San Antonio, I was like, if that guy's doing that, that's dangerous.
Yeah, Kevin Durant, when he's locked in like that. And you bring it up, the way he runs the floor, the spacing that he brings within the offense. When you have a guy that is 7'1" and can spread the floor, can run the floor, and can space the offense the way that he is able to do, he's comfortable wherever he is on the court. And when you see him locked in with that kind of mindset too, that we're seeing Chet play with more and get more comfortable within this system month in and month out, it's really dangerous. And when we see him attacking and just having an attack first mentality, he knows, though, he has the trust in his teammates that if he does attack and get stopped at the rim, that they're going to relocate and the shooters are going to be on the wings, ready to shoot, ready to spot up. Or worst case scenario, he can find SGA and SGA can finish the playoff. So right now, that duo and the way that they are playing, I don't even think we've seen them be close to hitting their ceiling with Chet and SGA. But Chet, his footwork, his fundamentals, his work ethic. I was talking to Nancy Lieberman about this because she covers the Thunder day in and day out. And I asked her what has surprised her the most about Chet. And he said his athletic ability wherever he is on the court. And I thought that was such a good point. He's aggressive if he's from behind the arc. He's aggressive if he has 2 feet in the lane and the paint. Like wherever he is going to be aggressive. And he's almost like coming into his body more and more. Obviously, he was elite before he even got to the NBA, but he seems more comfortable with his footwork. He seems more in control. And I think, week in and week out, he's just getting better. Now, hopefully the Pelicans can find an answer for him tonight and take care of him tonight. But he has been a really fun player to watch in this league.
Last thing for me, I wouldn't expect you to speak, kind of for the Thunder or for the organization, but maybe from a fan base standpoint or media covering the team. I mean, do we look at this season as like whatever happens from now on is kind of gravy? The fact that they've, exceeded expectations, I think, from an outside standpoint. Is it the kind of thing where you look at the second half of the season and then into the playoffs as just something that the Thunder and the fan base should enjoy in terms of this is kind of like the first step of the journey that they're kind of on?
I think that the fan base should definitely enjoy what they're doing right now. But I think that the organization as itself is far from satisfied with being the number 1 team in the West in January. They want to be the number 1 team in the West in April. And I think that they believe that they have the talent to be able to do that. I also don't think that the players themselves or the coaches are locked in so much of what they're doing right now, because these guys are competitors. They know what it takes to win at the highest level, going against the best players in the world night in and night out. So they are not comfortable with where they are at right now. Yes, the success that they have had is great. And I think in some ways it might exceed expectations from the outside looking in. But I think if you asked anyone within the organization, they would say, no, we're so hungry. We're not even close to being finished. And we want to make sure that this is a wave that we are riding for the next 3, 4 months, 5 months as well. Like a lot of basketball left to be played. And I think it's a really good question, though, because I was having this conversation with some people in our studio. How much attention are players putting into the standings right now? And asking former NBA players that question. And they're like, they're not. They're aware. They hear the outside noise, but they are not focused on being the number 1 team right now because we know how crazy this league is. We know how loaded and stacked and how talented the West is specifically. So you take one night off, you take 1 week off, and you can drop like that, even though they have been locked in and they've been in the top 3 for the last 2 months. So I think that they're definitely on the right path, but I think they're hungry and I think they're just fierce competitors, so they're not satisfied.
Yeah, no doubt, Madison. You take a look at the Western Conference standings, and I think 11 games are left for the Pelicans before they get to the All-Star break, 7 before the trade deadline. Who knows what other teams are going to be doing here as well. I think you're going to see one heck of a last couple of, games finish. And when you look at just really the games, I was looking at January as can you get through? It's the second most month that has games, 15. Only, passed by, I think November had 16. So 12 games in February, 14 in March, and just 8 in April. So look, if you could be like still above that 7th line going into February, Jim brought up last podcast, you're going to see a lot more Eastern Conference teams and stuff. But if we can, I'd be happy 8 and 7 at the end of the month. Now, obviously, a couple other people, Graf is greedy. He wants 9 or 10 wins, things that nature is why I think this one's probably such a key one with Milwaukee coming up tomorrow. You're at Boston. I think they've still only lost 1 game at home in Boston. So that's a tough place. Houston's always a tough matchup to round out the month. Madison, if they wind up 8 and 7 or better, that's a good month for me, huh?
I would say yes. I think when you're looking at the away stretch, the road stretch that they have as well, it goes back to, December, when they had all of those away, end of December, I think. Can't remember. I feel like this season has felt so long because we had the in-season tournament.
I agree.
So is it January? Is it February? I don't even know. Is it March? I don't know what month it is. But when they have that long stretch of road games and the way the Pelicans responded and how good they were on that road trip against some of the top teams in the league, I think that gave them so much experience. And something that we haven't really talked about either right now is how healthy this team is. And I want to knock on wood when I say that, but
we all did. Thank you, Madison.
when this Pelicans team is healthy, they are one of the top teams in the NBA. Yes, right now they're 6th as we talk here today. They're 6th in the Western Conference, but Sacramento is only a half a game back. Dallas is only 2 games back. You take a look at those standings and you have, like I said, a week where you drop 2 games and you can easily go from 6 to 8. And the Lakers, not a great team this year, have had some ups and downs. However, it's still the Lakers.
It's so sad.
You can't count them out.
You say
so sad to see them struggle.
Yeah, you say that.
I know. Darn.
I think it's going to be a fantastic finish there, and I think people are going to be locked in. And that's the thing, you mentioned it. Every single night, you have to play hard. If not, you can get blown out by 30 with today's 3-point games, and the way things are. So it's going to set up for much watch. All the games are bigger now. And I think that's interesting. You brought up about, do you look at the standings? I look at it as I do because I know I can't go on a 3, 4, 5 game losing stretch. So I do think that's one of the things we've talked about, the maturity of this team. You have a bad loss to be able to respond and get back on the winning track quickly, I think is key moving on forward. Don't you think, for the rest of the season?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we can sit here and we can talk about the games to come, but I bet the players will say, we're locked in on tonight and then we'll worry about tomorrow.
Right.
It was funny. We were having this conversation this time last year, me, David Wesley, and Antonio Daniels and Aaron Hardigan. We're talking about this a lot on air. At what point during the season do you call games must wins? And I don't think games right now are must win games.
Right.
I think games towards the end of February and March, when playoff stakes start to be on the line and tiebreakers, obviously that matters now, but more so later on, that's when I start feeling like games are must wins. So we went back and forth with this conversation a lot. David was kind of on the same page, Aaron, and the AD was like, games aren't must win until it's playoff time. and he had a really, conservative approach. He was like, if they think every game is a must win in January, February, March, well, what's the mentality that they're going to bring into the playoffs? Like, those are the must win games. Obviously, you have to do your work to get to that point. But I think right now, that's the one thing that I have enjoyed the most about this team this season is the Pelicans seem so focused and so locked in. And we haven't seen them go on a crazy losing stretch. Seems like when they get punched in the mouth, they respond the next night. And I think that we've only seen that elevated even more so since the in-season tournament and the loss to the Lakers. And I hate bringing that up, but to me, I think that that was a really defining turning point for this team because they were able to see that they needed to, what they needed to work on to beat big time teams and big time moments. And that's what Willie Green, I heard him talking to his team yesterday and talking to the media yesterday, saying that he addressed his team that the biggest area that they do need to improve on right now is winning those close games against big time teams. And so I think when we look at this stretch that they have coming up, are they going to rise to the occasion and win some of those close games and come out on top? And I think that that's where we'll really see, hopefully, a big growth out of the Pelicans down the stretch.
Double agent Madison Hock covers the Pelicans for Bally Sports New Orleans and the Thunder for Bally Sports Oklahoma City. Hey, look, I can't wait for this game. Thank you for coming on. Going to talk a little bit better, and you let us know when you're ready to play some 21.
Absolutely. Next time in New Orleans, we'll make that happen.
I love that. It makes sense. Are you ready, Jim?
I got to get in the gym. I got to get in the practice gym between now and whenever that is.
The hesitation says it all, Madison. The hesitation. You're on my team. You're on my team. We're good. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Our thanks to Madison Hock. I'm looking forward to her playing basketball against us or with us. Right? Did we ever figure, is it you and me against them, or did we draft? Are we drafting somebody from the Bally Sports crew to be with us? Also, we including, I guess, if AD is, we including radio.
If AD's playing, I've seen him shoot recently. If AD's playing, we're going to have to offset the talent somehow. I don't know how we're going to make the team fair.
I think JD's good for 6 fouls.
Yeah,
you know, JD could be down there in the block, just kind of throwing some elbows and stuff. JD comes across as somebody who doesn't mind getting dirty in there. You know, a little physical.
He's pretty old school.
Sure, absolutely. A little foot in the paint. You know,
definitely.
Well, I didn't mean to trip you as you go right into stanchion. Anyway, it is time for our Friday's numbers that trend or trending numbers.
Yes, Gus. And the trending number for this Friday is I'm going with 49, 40, and 86. And that is Herb Jones's shooting splits this season. We talk about 50, 40, 90 players. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that Herb Jones is actually on the verge of being a 50, 40, 90 guy. We think of players like Trey Murphy, where when you think of Trey Murphy, you think the first thing you think of is he's a great shooter. He does everything well from the field, from the three-point line, and from the free throw line. Herb Jones last season in those categories was 47, 34, 76. So you're talking below average three-point shooting percentage at 34, kind of a little bit below average free throw shooting at 76. The fact that he's up to 40 on threes and 86 at the free throw line, is such a huge testament to the improvement that guy has made and how much work he's put in. So, I mean, if you look at we all know, and we saw this in spades in the last game against Utah, the work that he does on the defensive end, if you take what he does defensively and you add, now he's a guy that's giving you sky-high offensive efficiency, that's the kind of player that just makes you really excited as far as his future and how he fits in the kind of stuff that he can do long-term with the Pelicans.
Let's see what takes place. Obviously, I think everyone that's on this roster is going to be needed at some point to contribute if you want to go where you want to go, right?
For sure. I mean, across the board, I think we're seeing that, though. We're seeing a lot of games where 6 or 7 guys are contributing double-digit scoring. You're getting offense from areas that you maybe going into the season you didn't necessarily think you were going to get it to this level. And again, going back to Herb Jones, I would say that he is in that category as well. But I mean, he's been one of the best shooters in the NBA in January from 3-point range. I mean, that's
crazy.
Saying a lot.
Would you have thought that?
No. I mean, the fact that also too, you know, it's funny, recently, I think it was a practice or a shoot around, I mentioned to him that he seems more confident in taking shots. And he said, he kind of looked at me and he was like, I don't know if I've really taken a pull-up 3-pointer this year. It's been a lot of catch and shoot stuff, but in the game, against Utah, he did take a pull-up 3 where he dribbled into a 3-pointer. So I looked at Will Guillory, who was sitting next to me, and I kind of gave him a look like, this is boy, our guy is really making progress in every area right now.
That's what you want to see with this team. You want to see this team kind of take different steps, and that means growth from all of these different players too. Because again, if you want to host the Larry O'Brien, it's going to take a lot. I mean, you need your star players to play like stars. Of the star players, one really needs to be a superstar, all of the different aspects of it. So we'll see what happens. But as always, Jim, appreciate the time.
Thanks, Gus.
Yep, that is Jim Eichenhofer. You can follow him over on X, Jim_Eichenhofer. And as always, you can listen here on the Pelicans Podcast. Have a great weekend. By the time we see you back on Monday, 3 games. Well, we've played 2 tonight and tomorrow. And then on Monday, Pelicans take on the Celtics in Boston. So we got a lot to talk about. Come on Monday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the games. And we'll see you once again right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.